You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Greetings and welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast, coming to you from Greysteel Strength and Conditioning in Farmington Hills, Michigan. I'm Jonathon Sullivan with my co-host Noah Hayden. We're guest hosts for the Barbell Logic podcast, and we thank you for joining us. Today, our guest is the very strong Laura Welcher. She's a Barbell Logic client and sometimes Greysteel client, coming in to join us today to talk about programming. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. And I'm joined again by my co-host and my associate coach at Greysteel, Noah Hayden.
Howdy. How are you doing?
All right. So let's get this show on the road. We got a lot to talk about with programming, and we're going to talk a little bit about programming for female masters as well.
I wanted to talk about this one point in particular in the last episode, but we didn't quite get to it. John Clausen pretty much introduced
We
himself.
talked about this a little bit yesterday.
So I didn't want to interrupt him, but before we start a program, we should rule out any contraindications to training.
That's part of our normal screening process here at Greysteel Strength and Conditioning. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about how when we bring somebody in, the first thing we do is assess their movement patterns and figure out how we're going to load them and get them on a program. But that's actually not the first thing to do. The first thing we do is we bring people in for an initial assessment.
A conversation.
And we do assess their movement during that initial consultation as well. But we basically take a complete medical and social history of the prospective client when they first appear at Greysteel, just like we would for any patient coming into a new clinic. And we rule out any potential contraindications. And I suppose, we could take a couple of minutes to just talk real briefly about what those contraindications would be. And they're extremely limited.
Mm-hmm.
My friend and client and healthcare colleague, Kurt Dalkin, once said, basically anybody who has a close relationship with their vascular surgeon, like that's a pretty good contraindication. So if you have an abdominal aortic aneurysm or a thoracic aneurysm, or you have a history of dissection, or, something that means that you have a close personal relationship with your vascular surgeon, that's going to be at least a relative, if not an absolute contraindication. People who have bad problems with, say, intractable epilepsy, that's pretty uncommon. People who have bad problems with recalcitrant, malignant tachyarrhythmias, those people are usually not going to present for training anyway. There are a few more like that. A lot of things that you would think would be absolute contraindications to training are not. Congestive heart failure is not an absolute contraindication for training. Morbid obesity is an indication for training, not a contraindication for training. Bad arthritis is not a contraindication. It's an indication for training. Bone-on-bone arthritis requires that we fix that problem and then train, right? So there are some things that sound like contraindications, but they're really not. So the first thing that we do when people present is we do a complete medical and social history and screen them for any potential contraindications. And the other thing that we do here at Greysteel, this is a little bit of like how the sausage gets made, is we basically give them a physician waiver to take to their physician, and they have to present that at the commencement of training, or they have to present us with a waiver of physician's endorsement, but one way or the other.
Right.
And actually, increasingly, what we see in those clients who do bring us a physician endorsement is that physicians are getting, they're starting to get a little bit more hip to what it is that we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
And there's increasing acceptance in the medical community. We still get more pushback than we want. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Noah. It was something that needed to be presented.
You're probably more aware of this than I am, but I know that when I was very young, my dad was moving a safe, I think, in our house or something like that. And he, slipped a disc in his back, whatever.
Yeah.
And was told by a doctor, you got to lay on a couch for 2 weeks and try not to move as much as possible. And I know that in general, that advice has shifted in modern times.
Yeah. So mea culpa, I was taught to do that. Like as a young intern, medical student intern and resident. And so I was actually part of that generation of doctors say, yeah, you just need to go lay down for a year or two. It'll be all right.
Take a break.
Yeah. And, fortunately, and I should have known better because I've been active, not necessarily with barbell training my whole life, but I should have known better. And so I was part of a medical generation that really screwed things up. We told people with acute back pain to go lay on their back and not lift anything heavy. And, and here's your Vicodin, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I'll probably spend some time in purgatory for all of that. Medical purgatory with a bunch of other doctors from the late 80s and early 90s. But, that ground has shifted, fortunately.
Did we cover artificial joints?
We haven't. We can maybe talk about that a little bit here and there. That's almost a whole podcast in itself. But
right. Is it a contraindication
no, it's
for
not
training?
a contraindication, and that's important. Artificial hip, artificial knee is not a contraindication to barbell training. Of course, it requires that we train that client judiciously, but here's the important thing to understand about that. In my career in emergency medicine, over 25 years, I saw a fair number of joint prosthetic failures where, the thing basically collapsed. But it was never the prosthetic. It was never the prosthetic that failed. It was always the bone stock that failed. Because what happened is they got this precious new artificial hip or this precious new artificial knee, and the buggered surgeon would tell them, now you have to be careful with that. You can't do anything heavy, right?
Don't destroy
my beautiful creation, right? And so the bone stock around the prosthetic would continue to spongify, and eventually it wasn't able to secure the prosthetic, and that's where it would fail. Outside of the setting of high velocity, high force trauma, I never saw a prosthetic fail. So no, that is not a contraindication. In fact, it is, a very strong indication for barbell training, because if I had an artificial joint, I would want to make that bone around that prosthetic as strong and as dense as I possibly could make it. I would load that sucker. Now, there are some finer points to this, like what kind of prosthetic do you get? Do you want one of the ceramic, AKA glass prosthetics, or do you want for me, it's going to be metal. But that's another discussion. But in terms of indications and contraindications, no. A prosthetic joint is a very strong indication for heavy resistance training.
So we were lucky enough to convince you to come today, Laura. You've got some experience with fairly advanced programming. At least your coach has told me so. Nurse Ann Bizard, who is our guest on the first episode that we did, is your mother. Did you start training after seeing her results, or was it independent of that?
I was thinking about that when I was thinking about getting ready for this podcast. My brother has been doing strength training for years and years and years. And, he was the one who ended up getting my mom into training with Sully. He tried to get me into it several years ago, probably a decade ago now. But aside from visiting him and trying some of the lifts, I was a runner then. I was kind of like, meh. So I didn't really get into it, and I just kind of kept on my running. And it wasn't until my mom started training with Sully that, and she started seeing, she started going through the LP and seeing those pretty amazing changes that you go through with LP. And she's like, Laura, you've got to do this. You have got to figure out a way to learn how to do this. Is there somebody in your area where you can go and learn these lifts? And I think this was before, I don't know when Barbell Logic got organized, but I don't think that was really an option. Then you kind of had to find somebody who was a practitioner in your area to go and learn this, or, get the books and try to do it yourself like my brother did. So I was lucky enough to have several people in my area who were trained in the method, and I went and learned from a coach who knew the method very well, Jeremy Tully in Berkeley. And, I worked with him off and on. He had a gym that wasn't really close to where I lived. So I would go see him every now and then. And I was training at Anytime Fitness for, you kind of travel a lot. That's a convenient thing. And so I would go to Anytime Fitness and I would do the workouts there. And then every now and then I would go in and he would kind of tweak the lifts for me. And
did you have anyone that you worked out with? Any training partners?
Most of the time, no. My husband did start learning the method as well. He went to Jeremy and learned the lifts. So we would do that sometimes together and sometimes separately. And then, a few years, maybe a year after that, we built our own gym. And then it became more possible to do online training. And the gym was still not very close to my home. So, in terms of the Bay Area, where it's really hard to get anywhere.
Yeah, but you guys were able to put a real nice setup in your home.
Yeah. Well, it's mostly nice. It's a tiny space.
But a lot of people deal with that. But you guys really,
But it's yours.
It's fine for me. I can press in this space, but my
That's
husband
all
can't
that
press.
matters.
He hits the ceiling. So it's not ideal, but it's not bad. And that is what enabled both of us to be able to, and the Barbell Logic.
So how do you like online coaching? How has that worked for you?
I really like it. I like the flexibility of it. If you're kind of a busy person and you've, got a job and you need that flexibility, it gives you the flexibility to work out whenever you want to or need to work out.
I do think that training people in person is far superior.
It's far superior
in every way, even for a coach, because I can give people real-time feedback and
absolutely.
And I can yell at people sometimes sort of nonstop while they're lifting so that they don't have the chance to interrupt with their own thoughts and throw themselves off balance. And you don't get that opportunity with online coaching. But we have set schedules. People come in on appointments, and if they're 2 hours late from that because they just had to take care of one little thing, they can't come. And that's not good.
Right. No, that's absolutely true. Yeah, so there's great advantages with flexibility. It really is beneficial to have your own home setup. Not everybody has that. I train in, these Anytime Fitness gyms, and that works as well. But I think what was absolutely critical is I started out learning the lifts in person. And I always had the opportunity to go in and train with somebody who could give me those kind of essential tweaks. So, yeah, maybe it's not ideal, but I think that there's a lot of advantages to it, especially when coupled with an in-person, the opportunity for some in-person
That's
training.
the thing with you, because you come back to Michigan very frequently. And when you do, you're here at Greysteel, and we have a chance to tune you up and so forth. But, let's back up just a second. We didn't ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and you're kind of an interesting person. So why don't you give us just a little bit of background before we go on?
Let's see where to start. You're probably referring to my work.
Yes.
My background to my work is that I'm trained as a linguist. I got my PhD in linguistics from Berkeley in California, which is also where I live. But I did my undergraduate here in Michigan and worked on indigenous languages that are spoken actually right where we're sitting here. And so I did that for many years. And then I did my postdoc actually at Wayne State. And then after my postdoc, I ended up at a nonprofit organization called the Long Now Foundation, which is in the Bay Area in San Francisco in California. And I started out there working on linguistics projects where the Long Now Foundation is trying to expand our sense of the here and now to be like civilizational on scale. So your here and your now is actually much, much broader. And the scope of your agency and your responsibility is actually a civilizational one. And we do these projects and programs that take that concept very seriously. So one of the main projects since the founding of the organization is the building of a giant mechanical clock that's sited on the inside of a mountain that can tick and keep time for 10,000 years. And I myself worked on a project that is building a very long-term archive of the world's languages and backing it up for thousands of years.
How many languages are in that database?
Thousands. There's probably about 7,000 extant languages and, lots more dialects and things like that. But that's what we see in terms of the world's linguistic diversity. And we've got, a good number of those in the collection. Not all of them actually have significant documentation associated with them, but, about 1,000 to half of them do, I would say.
And this database of languages, it includes not just like the orthography and the written language and stuff about grammar and syntax and vocabulary, but there are samples of the spoken language as well?
There are some. In some cases, like I said, we don't have documentation for all of these languages. And for any given languages, it's not it's not especially deep. Like, all of the work that I did on indigenous languages of this area they're in a different kind of an archive. So this is purposely broad, shallow survey of languages so that you can kind of present a snapshot of the world's linguistic diversity as, kind of an important collection about humanity and, the human culture and human language and human intellect.
I like the idea of a civilizational duty. That's going to come back to haunt us a little bit in our last episode when we talk a little bit about, when we riff a little bit on philosophy and how it applies to lifting and how, lifting is a metaphor for life or life is a metaphor for lifting.
Yeah.
So,
it's funny. There was a game that was played in ancient Greece and Roman times that we think was called Pack of Dogs. And they found tons of these boards, these game boards, all through time. I think it was played for 2,000 or 3,000 years. And over many, many cultures, there was different versions of it that it sort of evolved as time went along. But it was such a common game and so popular. Nobody wrote down the rules for it because it was obvious, right? And now it's not so obvious. So it's just funny that those kinds of things happen, that like the most common objects of a culture are the ones that are lost most readily.
Right.
Because people take it, the people who live it take it for granted.
And sometimes the most mysterious. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So ostensibly, our conversation today is about programming and sort of the life cycle of the lifter. I suppose I should say that Laura is not only extremely accomplished intellectually and professionally, but also you're pretty accomplished as an athlete, as a lifter. You're one of my strongest lifters, especially for your demographic. And, you've gone through quite a bit of programming evolution in your time. And so we're going to talk about that. And like all lifters, you started with the linear progression, although it sounds like it might have been a little bit off again, on again at the start. Like it was, because you didn't have a coach and you didn't necessarily have a regular lifting time. But all that kind of changed when you got into Barbell Logic online coaching. And I can't remember, I should have looked it up this morning. When you first started with me at Barbell Logic, were you still in the LP, or did we morph you into HLM pretty quick?
I was still in LP. I say we because I always think about like the coach and the client. I mean, in our case, I think of it as a partnership. So I'm going to say we a lot,
absolutely.
Right?
That's absolutely. That's a very penetrating observation, actually.
Yeah. So we started in the LP, and I think, I had a reset because I'd been training on my own quite a bit, and I learned some bad habits. And so, you took it back, and then we went through a regular LP, I think it was almost from the get-go.
It sounds like me.
Yeah.
So everybody does that, right? I mean, that's where everybody starts, is with the linear progression, which has been called the most basic form of periodization.
Mm-hmm.
So underlying all of this programming stuff is this sort of model that we have in our heads of this stress recovery adaptation cycle, which is the driver of this whole progressive overload thing. The idea that you impose a training stress and then you recover from the training stress and then you display a performance improvement. And this is all an adaptation of the whole general adaptation syndrome of Hans-Selye. Now, recently, some of us have begun to look at this and argue about it a little bit and talk about it a little bit. And for example, there's, the conference videos where myself and CJ Gocher and Will Morris and John Patrizio talked about programming. And the first two, CJ Gocher and I, had a kind of a friendly point-counterpoint. We agreed more than we disagreed about these models of training and these models of adaptation, like the general adaptation syndrome and the stress recovery adaptation kind of thing. And when you actually look at what's going on biologically, it's a lot more complicated than that. I mean, it's really, really hard to map discrete biological, biochemical, genetic processes onto the stress recovery adaptation syndrome.
Not that surprising.
Not that surprising. But, I kind of feel like I'm a little bit different from CJ on this. Again, we agree more than we disagree on it. But like, it's a model. It's like in the Holy Grail, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and they're going, Camelot, Camelot, Camelot. And one of them says, it's only a model. Right? This is a model of a castle up on a hill. It's only a model. And that's what it is. It's only a model. So although the whole stress recovery adaptation model,
it's simplified, but I think that there's a lot of value in an effective heuristic concept.
Yeah, I think you get really tripped up if you try to say, well, that model's not real. Well, yeah, what's real? So like, here's a model, metabolism, right? Or catabolism or something.
Aerobic and anaerobic
exactly.
systems that are independent, supposedly.
Right. So, like I've never seen metabolism, right? Or here's one, 5, right? Like I've never tripped over the number 5 in my daily life. I've never held it in my hand, right? So it's helpful to have these models, if you will, or these concepts, and not to get too hung up on like, well, what's the underlying physical reality of that? I think that the stress recovery adaptation model works really, really well from a programming perspective. But of course, the devil's in the details and things start to get complicated after a while. In the linear progression, the stress recovery adaptation cycle is completed from workout to workout. You impose a training stress, you go home, you rest, you come back, and you both display a performance improvement and take on the next training stress simultaneously. And that works really, really well for a period of time. In younger athletes, it's going to work, 3-4 months. In older athletes, I see a biphasic distribution. So in older athletes, what I see with the LP is there's a group of them who basically complete it pretty quick. You're just not, and not because they're so strong, but because you just can't keep adding weight to their bar for 3 sets of 5. You just can't keep doing it. And then there's a group where like the LP just drags on and on and on.
Why do you think that is, that there is sort of 2 different responses to the LP?
Well, I'm sitting here thinking it's not a clean 2 different, because there's also, it's a triphasic or a polyphasic response. So you also have a population, a large part of the master's population that never gets out of the LP, right? They train with you for years and years and years, and maybe you get them to a heavy light sometimes, or you get them to a highly modified, advanced sort of individualized novice program.
So people that I have that are like that,
something happens.
It's because of vacations and
illnesses,
grandkids
injuries,
come in from out of town, and then
we're going back
sprain their ankle.
Yeah, and then it's back to LP.
Yeah,
so they're like, they're in this perennial linear progression. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's totally okay as long as they keep training. And what's kind of interesting is they make progress. You never get them to more advanced forms of programming, but they
still inch forward.
They still inch forward, right? But that's not the, the quote unquote typical progression. So that's the linear progression. And what's amazing about it is that, it works every time, that particular application of the stress recovery adaptation cycle. It works every single time, as long as somebody does it. So then, as I recall, you completed your LP and you got pretty strong on LP. You're strong. And the other thing about you is that you're very coachable. So I don't think we ever wasted any time putting you through Texas.
No.
But we allowed your linear progression to sort of gradually morph into a heavy, light, medium program. And first it was sets of 5, but we
took that down pretty quick to sets of 3, at least on the squat.
Yeah, we changed you to sets of 3, and now you're in a very individualized heavy, light, medium program where you've got like a heavy single or a heavy double on heavy day, and the rest of the time it's sets of 3 and sets of 5. On your upper body exercises, you do lots of sets of 8.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah.
Those are fun.
I'm getting the evil eye here. And you've made pretty extraordinary progress, and to the point where you actually went to competition twice. You went to competition twice.
I showed up twice and I competed once. So my mom was in both competitions.
Right.
And so that was at the Chicago Fall Classic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did she drag you along, or were you a willing participant?
Oh, we like to travel together and we have fun. We were in Chicago for a while, like vacationing.
Yeah, and you did us proud.
Yeah.
What were your lifts that day, if you recall?
Squat was around 200. Well, I'm thinking, it was all in.
Yeah, it was. That's what I remember as well. It was around 200, and you pressed around 80, I think.
I think it was higher.
Yeah.
It might have been closer to 90. Yeah, I'm not remembering. And we might have taken it down a little bit for competition because...
Very impressive lady master's press. And then you killed it on the deadlift. You did something ridiculous on the deadlift. What was it? I'm trying to remember.
It was like 250, I think.
It was 250, 260, something like that.
Yeah.
And then what's happened recently with you is you've actually gotten more into conditioning. You're doing a pretty advanced rowing program.
Mm-hmm.
And you've made some changes in your nutritional strategy as well. And you're looking pretty trim and lean these days. And so obviously a little bit of weight has come off the top on your loading for heavy, light, medium, but you're still putting up some pretty heavy weights. And I think that we will get you back within striking distance of some of those old PRs that you put up, because that's what happens. People, they'll drop some weight, but Alan Thrall did a video recently about he did a big cut and he had DEXA scans before and after. And
what scans?
A DEXA scans, a body composition scan, dual X-ray emission absorptiometry, right, which gives you a pretty exact reading of your body composition compartments. And he thought, he lost a lot of fat. He got pretty jacked, but he didn't lose as much muscle as he thought, like just a couple of pounds, and retained a pretty fair amount of his strength. And that's what we find. We used to be like, well, if you lose all that weight, you're going to lose all your gains. Yeah, you lose some, but you can get them back. And I've been through the same thing recently as well.
I don't know. This is a question that's been going through my mind as I've, taken off. I took off like 20 pounds since, well, what are we at? We're in September now.
Over about the last year, I think.
Since March.
Yeah.
I took this down. Well, actually, it was more than 20 pounds. And now I'm lifting, in terms of my body weight, I'm lifting at higher percentages than I was then. So I think this is my question to the coaches is, which is better, like absolute poundage that you can lift, even if, because if you look at like I'm sure I was fatter then, but I had more muscle.
Well, right? I think that this is a perfect softball question because the answer to that is it depends on your goals.
Really?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So if you're a power lifter and unless you change your weight class by losing weight, in which case, that's a different question. Let's set that aside. But if you're a power lifter, like you don't care what you look like and you don't care what your body fat is.
And if someone doesn't mind their appearance and they're comfortable with their quality of life at a particular weight, who cares?
Right. So again, I think it depends on your goals, but I think it's a mistake in a situation like yours to think that you've lost something other than some body fat, right? And again, I think that you probably haven't lost as much muscle as you might think. Your lifts actually look better than before you lost that body weight. And so, you lost 10, 15% of your tonnage off the top, but you're still able to perform at an extremely high level and your conditioning is better. So I think if you look at what you're lifting as a function of your body weight, you're still pretty much in the elite range for your demographic. I mean, that has not changed.
Sure.
So in a way, you're actually stronger and fitter than you were before.
Oh, good, because this is my hypothesis, and I just was looking for confirmation.
Okay,
from my coach.
I think you're an extraordinary athlete, and if anything, you're even more extraordinary now. So think about it: like you're 20 pounds lighter, you're a year older, and you're lifting better, and your weights are still, in that same elite performance range that they were before. So. Yeah.
A successful program.
We're proud of you.
Yeah.
Aw, thanks.
So I think what comes out of that is how an LP is a pretty universal program. I mean, you have to make, especially with masters, you have to make kind of individual adjustments for that individual master standing in front of you. So for example, John Clausen's LP is going to be rather unlike a vanilla LP, right? But in general, you're going to start everybody out more or less the same. 3 sets of 5, squat, press, bench, dead, right? For masters, maybe a 2-day program. For most people, a 3-day program. You're going to march them through that LP and you're going to start to make changes. For females, you might want to start doing 5 sets of 3 instead of 3 sets of 5. And you're going to start to change the amount of weight that you add to the bar each time as they get stronger and things get heavier. And then eventually you're going to you're going to start to make some changes in anticipation of that program morphing into a more complex structure, a heavy, light, medium, or, maybe a Texas, something. I think of Texas as a sort of heavy, light, medium. And
it is. It's a heavy, light, heavy.
Yeah. And so what's going to happen is that LP is going to morph into something that's more or less like a vanilla template, heavy, light, medium structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're not going to be able to sustain that. Like what I always like to say is a master's population is pretty heterogeneous. Like you take 100 bros, 100 college age bros, and that is a very homogeneous demographic, Yeah, there's variation in it, but there's a lot more variation in 100 masters than there are in 100 bros, right? Their life has just had more of a chance to bring out the individual differences and impose unique scarring and life events and experience and personality. So, it's all accentuated in the master, the individualization of programming as it proceeds. And so what happens is, I always like to say, the intermediate program starts to shrink wrap itself onto that individual athlete. It starts to become more of a tailored program to that individual athlete. And that's and you experience that, Noah, working with masters.
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends. I guess, like you said, it is polyphasic. Some people can really drive small increases in a simple LP structure for quite a while. Other ones sort of burn out quick, especially with women. You've got to go to triples or whatever. Other women just keep inching forward
with fives.
Yeah. I've got several women that are doing that right now, and I was going to change them, but they're still doing fine. So I'm leaving it alone. It works.
And that's what I do with Laura. So, in your case, you've got a heavy, light, medium structure that's productive for you right now. I mean, when we started your heavy, light, medium, we started with a top set of like fives or triples, something like that. Mm-hmm. It morphed out of your LP. And we just stayed with that until it didn't work anymore. And then we added a little volume here and we took away a little volume there. And so right now what's happening on most of your lifts is where I find a lot of heavy, light, medium programming ends up going with masters. And where that goes, maybe, Noah, you have something to say about this, because I know that this is heresy in some quarters. But where a lot of my heavy, light, medium athletes end up going, and where I'm going, where I am right now on a 4-day split block structure, is I end up expressing the entire rep range in my program. So, for example, on a heavy day, Laura will do a heavy single, right? She'll work up to a heavy single, and then she'll, depending upon the lift, she'll back off to a heavy triple and maybe 2 sets of 5 from there, right? And on an upper body movement, she'll do a heavy single and maybe a heavy set of 3, and then she'll do a couple of sets of 8, right? And so she's expressing that entire rep range across a range of reps. And she makes progress on that. And I make progress on that. And a lot of our athletes at Greysteel make progress on that, which is kind of like it's not a daily undulating periodization. It's sort of an intra-workout undulating sort of rep range kind of thing. And
I do find, so we actually haven't really talked about this very much.
Not that much, no.
But I have found that the more advanced certain lifters get, I think especially with upper body lifts for men and women, we tend to have 1 or 2 top triples and then back off sets of 8.
Sets of 8 are great for upper body.
And not 5s anymore for quite a while.
Right.
And that seems to work really well.
It does work really well.
I think that's a good approach.
And the lifter and their performance tells you when she's ready for that change. So again, it's that
right.
minimum effective dose. And when it's time for a change, like I think you'll agree, Laura, I've never really changed your program wholesale. Like when we went from LP to heavy, light, medium, it wasn't like, okay, like here's a big singularity and we're going to change everything and just drop you into the sort of heavy, light, medium structure. I like for things to sort of gradually morph from one program into another. So there's
and it might depend on the lift too, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
I will say also that even when maybe the goal with a certain day is not necessarily to hit a top single, or something that's really pushing the envelope of what you can do, even if it's just kind of a more ho-hum volume day, I have found some benefit in having people do a heavy-ish single first and then the volume work, because it's sort of it sort of wakes their CNS system up a bit and makes all the volume work feel lighter.
Yeah. Again, I think that that's probably heresy in some quarters, but that's become my modus operandi at Greysteel. It just works really, really well.
I think especially for masters, it works well because they need a little bit of help waking them up a little bit, waking their bodies up a little bit.
Again, to point to Alan Thrall, he did another video a year or two ago about you should be doing heavy singles. Heavy singles, first of all, they're a pretty discrete metric of where you're at.
Absolutely.
Right? And the other thing is that they're a different experience than a set of 5 or a set of 8, right? Putting up a pretty heavy single is different from putting up a heavy set of 5. It's a different experience. But what I feel like I've learned how to do working with masters is to capture that rep range within a single program or a single workout, right? And the proof is in the pudding. Do people get stronger on that? And the answer is, yeah. I mean, we see that all the time here. So, I don't know if that's something that would work as well in younger athletes. My deficiency as a coach is that I don't work with younger athletes. So I'm pretty focused on what works in my population. But that kind of thing works really well in my population. And so what's happening with my intermediate athletes is they're putting up one heavy single, or in some cases, one heavy double or triple every week. And I like to get them to those heavy singles pretty quickly. So if somebody stays on a heavy, light, medium structure long enough with me, they're going to be putting up heavy singles for every lift every week. And I find that works pretty well.
Don't you have, I can't remember if this was in my LP or might have been in my mom's LP, where you have athletes chase singles?
I do. So that's
a lot of fun.
That's another thing that we do from time to time. And I'll tell you when that works. And Noah has seen this in action, and I think he's probably using it in his own practice here at Greysteel as well. So, for example, Debbie Rotzlowski will be in to talk to us on one of these episodes. She's one of my athletes, and she's going, because of the whole COVID situation, she's going to be gone from Greysteel for about 9 months. And so she's becoming a Barbell Logic client of mine. But she had her last day of training here on Wednesday. And what we did is let's chase singles, right? And we find that we have the opportunity to do that with just about every athlete. At least once a quarter, we have this opportunity to chase singles because some life event is going to take them out of the gym for a week or 2 weeks, right?
Right.
And so for their last workout, it's like, okay, let's
go for broke.
Yeah, let's go for broke. Let's chase singles and see what kind of singles you can put up. Usually it's squat, press, deadlift. Every now and then it'll be bench.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that thrilled about the bench. We can talk about that some other time. But
I love the bench.
What kind of press can you put up? What kind of squat can you put up? What kind of deadlift can you put up? And usually, almost always when we do that, when we have a chasing singles day, we get at least 1 PR and sometimes 3.
Sure.
So Debbie PR'd, I think she PR'd all 3 the other day. And so pretty awesome. And
it's fun. I think this is a big point, is that who said that maybe it's less than ideal programming per se, but who said that programming must be boring and awful and a grind every day? It's supposed to be a life habit that enriches your life.
Yeah, exactly. And it is going to be kind of boring and grinding and grueling most of the time. So why not celebrate, what you've been able to build? And, if you have to leave the gym for a week or 2 weeks, right? Or you have to go off and turn to online coaching for a while and go to Florida for 9 months, what better way to send you off, right? What better accomplishment to take with you? Like if I'm going to go on a vacation and I put up a bunch of new PRs before I go on vacation, well, that vacation just got off to a good start, right? So it's fun and it's life affirming, and it sort of is this gratification and reward for all this hard, grueling work, because it is hard and grueling that you've been doing in the gym. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So that's a real important part of what we do here. So we're sort of like as far along in the lifter's life cycle as we usually get.
For anybody.
Right. And particularly for masters.
Yeah,
a lot of masters never really get out of LP. We talked about that. But those that go on to some sort of intermediate programming, what we find is that program shrink wraps onto them. It becomes extremely individualized. And then something happens, right? There's a life event. There's an illness, there's an injury, there's a death in the family, there's a vacation, something like that happens. And then there's a layoff. And then they come back, and what do? Do we put them back on their highly individualized intermediate programming?
Nope.
We put them back
Start
on
a little light, see how it feels.
Right. And
Ease
it's an
back
LP,
in.
right? It's an LP, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a little bit longer. And then what's always surprising to intermediates is we do the same thing. We let that LP rather more rapidly sort of morph into their new intermediate programming.
Mm-hmm.
And they're always surprised when the contours of that new intermediate program aren't exactly like the intermediate program that they left when their layoff started. Well, of course it's not going to be, right? Because things are different now. That was then, this is now. But gradually it will again morph and shrink wrap onto them and become something that drives their progress. It wouldn't necessarily work for somebody else.
And, another thing too is that sometimes there's changes like that because that lifter's goals have changed.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel that frequently happens. There was a time when I wanted to push my numbers up no matter what. I gained 60 pounds on my LP, and my LP lasted 9 months because of that. And when I tell people the opposite, when I tell people my LP lasted 9 months, they said, how did that happen? And I said, well, I gained 60 pounds, so it keeps going up, right?
Right.
But after I pushed that for a while, just to sort of see what I could do, because I figured it's the one opportunity in my life to do that. And
exactly.
It's a bit more problematic to gain that kind of weight when you're older. Then my goals changed and I lost 30 pounds back down. And same thing you were talking about before, I didn't really lose that much strength. And frankly, especially with my deadlift, the additional comfort that I felt to be able to get to in the bottom position kind of made all the difference and made it more enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm in the same place. I would still like my numbers to move forward, but for a 60-year-old man at my body weight, I'm pretty happy with my numbers. I've done pretty well. And like Laura, over the last year, I lost about 20 pounds. And my numbers are just fine. In fact, I've put up some recent PRs, and I'm just as strong, if not stronger, than I was when I was 20 pounds heavier. And I have more of an emphasis on conditioning now, and I'm less aggressive about Olympic lifting than I was because I'm 60, I'm still doing it, but I know that eventually it'll have to go by the wayside. So yeah, your goals change and your priorities change with time, but the training is still there. You still understand the fundamental importance of what it is that we do.
What I try to impress on all of my lifters that come in the gym is that it's not just about strength training for the sake of strength training, that it's supposed to be a tool that you can use no matter what stage of life you're in, no matter what goals you have in the short term or the long term for that stage of life. It's a tool for managing your physical body.
Right.
So if you get hurt and you tweak your back, you've got to train more, not less, right? You've got more important training instead of less. It's not this great excuse to do nothing.
And that physiological reserve, that strength, that stamina, capacity, your overall health, that muscle tissue, that muscle gland that you require for proper metabolism, that strong bone that you require for resistance to injury, all that stuff becomes more important.
Absolutely.
As the years pile on, not less important. One of our lifters has been talking a lot lately about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. First, what you've got to take care of is your physical well-being. There has to be first of all, there has to be internet. But on top of that, a little less fundamental is your physical security, food, air, water, and your physical health and strength. So when you're training, you're really addressing the foundation of your physical being. And, somebody once said, strength is the most important thing in life. And, people take issue with that, but it really is, because strength is the ability to move and to be strong and to be healthy and to be fit, without which the rest of life can quickly become irrelevant, or at least not particularly enjoyable. And so, yeah, it gets more important as time goes on.
And can I bring up the point that when I first started training with Greysteel, with you, Sully, that I thought, I was in my mid-40s when I started training, and I thought I was too young to be your trainee. So I was like, oh, I don't know if he's going to take me out. I'm kind of too young. But my mom kept saying that you want to start on this early. Like, it's a tool that you're going to have in your toolbox.
Absolutely.
You're banking bone, you're banking muscle.
Physiological 401k.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about it. This is like my long-term thinking project about my life and my body, right? So I want to start younger on this. But I think that is a really good point. Is that even though we have this kind of broad age range of masters, which is not like the ones that aren't like the kids anymore,
Right.
But if you're starting in your 40s or your 50s, that really kind of gives you a leg up. But you can also start like my mom did in her 70s, right? And you can go through an LP.
It's
and you can make
accessible to
progress.
everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think we're going to talk more about this in the final episode that we do, right?
Right.
But the thing that I love about training is that no matter what setbacks you have, no matter what conditions you have, you can make your situation better with training. Right? No matter what age you are, it's accessible to everyone to be in control of their destiny.
All other things being equal, being stronger is better, right? So, I've been strong and I've been weak, and being strong is better, right? So, or as we often say, you can be old and beat up and weak, or you can be old and beat up and strong.
Yep.
Like I can't fix the old part, and, there's the old Basque saying, everyday wounds and the last one kills. I can't change that either. But what I can do is I can make you strong. And it's like being rich. I've been rich and I've been poor, and rich is better. I've been strong and I've been weak, and weak is better. And it's exactly like a physiological 401k. The earlier you start, the better off you're going to be. But, if you get to be 50 and you realize you haven't saved for retirement, you don't just throw up your hands. You start saving, right? The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So we've had people start in their late 80s, John Clausen, and it's done wonders for him. So it's never too late to start. But that being said, I did want to get through this entire sort of life cycle. So what happens, and what we almost never observe at Greysteel, and what we almost never observe in the masters population, but we have to talk about it for completeness, is that eventually even an intermediate, heavy, light, medium structure for the people who are the most committed and the most gifted is not going to be enough to drive progress. So eventually what we see in those people is a morphing into a 4-day split kind of structure where, because the weights that they're moving, if they come in and do a heavy day with, a squat and deadlift and an upper body movement, they're just going to be cooked, right? They're not going to be recovered enough for even a light day. And so what we do is we split the upper body and the lower body, and we do a heavy light split. And the way we do this at Greysteel, or the way we don't have any clients on a heavy light split right now, except for myself.
Right.
Is you do something like a heavy press light bench day, a heavy squat light dead day, a heavy bench light press day, and a heavy dead light squat day. And most masters are never going to get to that.
So, a traditional 4-day split is 4 days a week. Is that how you would do it?
Well, it depends. I did try one of our athletes on a 4-day split recently, and she's in the late 7th decade. Very, very strong lady. So in her late 60s, she deadlifts 225 and she squats like 170. Very strong lady. And so what I tried to do was a 2-week 4-day split, right? So she would work out 2 days a week, and she's also doing some conditioning and spread it out over 2 weeks. She didn't like it. And we took some weight off the top and went back to a heavy, light, medium structure. So that kind of didn't work. But I would try somebody on something like that first, in the rare event where it actually materializes, because frankly, most masters never get to that point. I'm on a 4-day split, but I probably actually train a little too much.
Imagine that.
And, I would probably be just fine if I went back to something like a 3-day. I'd probably hurt a little bit less, but I like to train heavy. And then, the ultimate is where, somebody's really in the elite range and they're competitive and they're all about how much weight they can lift and they're really, really committed. And I've I've never seen this in our client population, but the heavy light split eventually morphs into the most, sort of complex periodized programming of all, which is your block program. So you go from a linear progression to an intermediate program, which is going to have something like a heavy light medium structure, and that's going to morph into a 4-day split. And eventually that 4-day split is going to be periodized over some sort of block programming structure. And we talk about all this in the book, the Barbell Prescription. But when we talk about block programming, I think, with something like an accumulation and then an intensification phase, and what we talk about it in the very most general terms, very abstract terms, because almost nobody in the master's population is going to get there, right? And they don't need to. They don't need to enjoy the benefits of strength training. Right. And secondly, by the time they do get there, it's going to have to be so individualized that only the crudest template can really be presented for that kind of training structure.
Absolutely.
So that's how I see the life cycle of any athlete, the training evolution of any athlete, and theoretically the master's athlete. But the truth of it is that most master's athletes never get beyond and never need to get beyond an intermediate training structure.
I want to add to that part of the reason why is because you have to kind of also be, it's not just about missing days or having a setback or not. You have to kind of be all in with advanced training, that everything you do revolves around how it affects your training. And most masters are not living their lives to lift. They're lifting to live their lives.
Exactly. And that's a really, really important principle. You don't live to train, you train to live.
Yeah.
And so again, the very reason that the intermediate structure gets interrupted and we have to take people back to LP and there's these discontinuities because people have professions and they have dreams and they want to travel and they have grandkids and they want to go out and live their lives. And they're able to do all of that better
because of their training.
Because of their training.
So earlier I said that, part of the reason why some people stay in LP is because the grandkids come to town. That's a good reason to have a reset in the gym, because that's the reason why they're doing it, because now they can pick their kids up.
Exactly. And I suppose, at some point we're going to have to address this whole issue of, programming for masters and the role of intensity and volume. This is a tempest in a teapot. It's been made artificially contentious. For those of us who work with masters, we know that there is a limit to how much volume you can impose on a master. And that limit is going to be lower than it would be for, a younger athlete.
But it's a hard limit.
It's a hard limit. Yeah.
You can reach that hard limit with proper sleep and proper nutrition and all of that, but it's a hard limit.
Yeah. And it's not because of muscle. That's the thing, right? So, if I'm imposing a lot of volume on you, and I'm making you sore like you have DOMs, right? Like a lot of our masters, this, they're willing to live with a significant amount of muscle soreness because they see what's happening to their bodies and they see what's happening to their lives. But in masters, it's not the muscle soreness. It's the tendon soreness and it's the joint soreness and it's the ligaments and it's, it's the stiffness and the very, very deep sort of metabolic injury that they can get from that kind of thing. And they just don't bounce back as quick. And what you can't do is bring a master in and impose a training stress on them that they can't quite recover from before the next episode of training. And now they're not able to pick up their grandkid. Right. And they're not able to clean out the garage and they're not able to go dancing with their loved one because
or they might try to because I'm just a little sore and then they get hurt. And then they're out of the gym for 2 months.
Yeah. So in case any of you were wondering on the whole volume sensitivity thing, not only have I not changed my mind, but the longer I do this, the more sure I am that it's a correct principle for training masters. So
one last thing I wanted to say about that is that obviously programming is a balance between increasing stress and managing recovery. And it's a fine balance.
It's exactly what it is.
It's really dangerous to tip that scale and overtrain a master.
It is.
Right?
It is.
Because they might not ever come back to the gym after that, for one. they might not be able to come back to the gym again after that.
Which is a great disservice to them and their lives and their loved ones.
And I think that it's important to know that, practically speaking, most masters, virtually all masters, are not actually moving in absolute terms that much weight. And for the same reasons why a weak younger person in their LP is pushing intensity is really the same reason why a master would push intensity. If you can only squat 100 pounds, you need to be squatting 100 pounds every time you work out, because 70 pounds isn't going to do anything for you. 5x5 at 70 pounds isn't going to do anything.
Exactly. And I think Laura can speak to that, like in her own programming. Like, you have a lot of stamina. You're very, very fit, right? Especially now with this pretty aggressive rowing program that you're doing. And you have a pretty huge work capacity. Like, when you come back from a layoff, you still have a pretty good work capacity. You might get a little bit gassed, but you're able to do a bunch of sets and reps. And for a master, you're actually on, you can attest that I'm not afraid of using volume in the correct dose, because I use it on you. But I think what you can also tell is that, work capacity aside, when you come back from a layoff and you haven't been moving a heavy weight, like, it's gone, right? Like, say you're doing a 200-pound squat and then you have a layoff of just a week, right? When you come back, you're not going to get that 200-pound squat again.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is not necessarily what we observe in younger athletes. So a younger athlete, like, you have him deadlift 450, 475 pounds for a single or a double. He goes to Fort Lauderdale for a week. He comes back. He's like, yeah, that was great. I think I can do 500 a day. And he'll do it, right?
And I bet
It's just
that
different.
a lot of that has to do with hormonal profile.
It's exactly hormonal profile and just recovery capacity, right? So a kid can take that week off and use it to, like, build a bunch of muscle and recover. But a master is just, they're intensity dependent. So that's another principle of training masters, that the longer I do it, the more I believe it, because the more I see it. It's absolutely true. And I certainly feel it in my own lifting.
Yeah, their degradation rate has accelerated.
Exactly. So that's a pretty good place to leave it.
I think so.
Laura, do you have anything to add? Anything that you think our listeners need to hear before we sign off? You've come really far. You're pretty extraordinary. And
That's the thing. I don't think, although I appreciate my coach saying that I'm extraordinary, I don't think that's the case. I think, I don't think of myself as being a particularly competitive lifter, or even that I'm moving large absolute amounts of weight. But I think for me, I am. And it's made a tremendous difference in my life and what I'm able to do. And I think it would be great if more people could do it. I think it would improve a great number of lives.
If more people like you, the world would be a better place in which to live. All right. So that's as good a place as any to leave it. I'm Jonathon Sullivan, your guest host, with my co-host Noah Hayden, coming to you from Greysteel Strength and Conditioning. And thank you once again for listening to the latest installment of the Barbell Logic podcast. And we'll talk to you again next time. Bye for now.